Just a bit of awkward silence to begin. Okay, can everybody see the slides? Fabulous. And welcome everybody to our survey findings launched today on rent setting in Wales. So we're going to go over the report summary. We'll give an overview of the findings, and we'll look at the different methods that we've employed to gather our data and provide very basic overview. So highly recommend actually reading the report, or at least the key findings and recommendations in the executive summary. We've got 4 panelists here today who I will introduce when they're going to be talking about how they have felt about the report and the findings and how they may link to some of the findings that they've looked at. So the survey we broke down into 27 questions and it was with 4 sections. So we looked at different landlord and tenant communication, changing rent formulas, service charges and affordability. And we've done this following the feedback that we've had from you guys, or some of you guys, so housing associations and local authority staff and tenants. And they asked us to break that down into different regions, so north, west, mid, southeast and southwest, so that the findings can be used when you're setting your own standards internally. Staff told us that it would really help them to share with the boards and enable them to use the findings for that kind of planning and strategy. Our findings were also shared with our Tenant Pulse Advisory Group, who are here today for scrutiny. So advertising of the survey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you here today. Advertising very much in line with our past practice here. We advertise our Tenant Pulse surveys digitally, online, and something we did this time as well, in line with our past practice, was advertising through Meta, so that's Facebook and Instagram for those who are on the platforms. Something just to highlight quickly here is that we're really proud to say that our survey was filled in 58% of the time by the advert, so it does show that tenants are accessing voices there as well.
Thanks, Eleanor. Yeah, so it was sent to all of our Tenant Pulse members, and as Eleanor's just mentioned, we did an advertising campaign on social media, which we usually find is very successful. So the report has now gone live on our website, so it can be accessed if you haven't had eyes on it already. You can look at it at www.tpas.cymru. So we have got the full report, and I cannot remember off the top of my head how many pages it is, but it is quite long. And there's an executive summary. And the reason it's long is because we wanted to make sure that we looked at all the demographic groups when we were analysing the data, so that everybody could really get an insight into what people were saying it within those different regions and different local authorities and housing associations. So there were a lot of findings and recommendations within each section. In terms of landlord and tenant communication, we have seen an increase from last year. So the findings last year came out, and there was quite a disappointment amongst the sector that despite housing associations and local authority staff putting out comments and putting out information to their tenants, they felt that they weren't seeing it. So this year that has increased to 89% of tenants have seen communication from their landlords, particularly around financial support. That's improved significantly. However, it seems that tenants whose main source of income is earned from working, we're not seeing the same comms. So we'll look at that a little bit more in the recommendations. More tenants than last year want to know how their rents are spent. So that's increased as well, that kind of interest in what their rents are being spent on. And reasons for dissatisfaction in the comms, so those that weren't happy with the communications that we're having, were based on frustration over rent increases, and for those with disabilities, over increasing service charges as well. So they felt that the rents were increasing, service charges were increasing, but they weren't sure what they were paying for. In terms of rent formulas, 71% of tenants felt that their rent should not be increased, even if their energy bills were lower. So obviously this is something that we've looked at in terms of net zero homes and zero carbon, etc. It's so big at the minute. And when we've had conversations with tenants, the evidence has seemed a little bit different to what we've seen in this survey. So it seems that it's increasing, that people are just don't think their rent should increase based on energy bills being lower. And ultimately, this was consistent across the different variations of rent, with with the least opposition coming from charging more for new homes. And the strongest disagreement came around linking social rents to market rate variations, as is done in the PRS. So 88% of tenants were opposed to doing that, and they felt that they felt it should be based on the property rather than the area that they were living in. In terms of service charges, there has been a growing awareness of what service charges has been spent on again, so that has increased since last year. However, there are still 42% of tenants are feeling unaware, with significant variations between housing associations and local authorities tenants. Tenants also highlighted that they are feeling really frustrated with paying for a service, and the quality and frequency of that service has felt substandard or non-existent. And so really focusing on that lack of transparency around and value for money. And then with affordability, tenants' views on affordability. So less tenants were feeling that their rents are affordable this year, as was predicted. Since 2023, we have seen a decrease in tenants viewing their rent affordable, and we had consistent themes around rents increasing and income not increasing, as we're aware. Tenants speak of making sacrifices to afford their rents and the impact this is having on their mental health. Tenants felt that they weren't getting value for money with repairs and maintenance, as they weren't being carried out. So just a point that stood out, affordability or lack thereof is causing emotional and physical strain, psychological strain on tenants, excuse me. Tenants report that the financial pressure combined with poor living conditions and issues navigating the benefit system is causing stress and impact on mental health and therefore other services. So our recommendations, again, were broken down into the 4 sections. And in the report, that's done together. So you can just pull out sections of the report based on what you're actually looking at internally within your organisation. So there's 5 to 6 recommendations per section. And within landlord and tenant communication, it was mainly around that transparency and explanation of where rents are being spent. So we recommended that enhancing those target communications around specific audiences, so knowing who your audiences are in terms of tenant profiling, etc. Landlords to provide that transparent explanations around where this additional rent is spent, and even if that is to do with inflation rates, with the cost of staffing, etc. Tenants want to know that. Targeting comms to ensure that the reach is reaching specific groups. So as I mentioned previously, the working groups don't seem to be receiving those communications. Just tenants really want to be able to understand what their rents are being spent on. And as we said in the findings, that has increased since last year. So, targeting those communications for specific groups. When we look at the rent formula options, we want landlords to consider tenant preferences around affordability and consider differing opinions amongst regions and underrepresented groups. And when you look at the report, you can see the differing in, oh my goodness, you can see that it differs amongst different groups. So again, going back to that kind of tenant profiling, understanding who your tenants are before when you're looking at those different rent formulas. Service charges. So tenants again linked it back to that transparency. We should improve transparency by covering how those calculations are made for service charges, and that was spoken about so often amongst the tenants, is that they want to know if their service charges are going up, or if even if they're staying the same. They just felt that they didn't know what those service charges were going on. So we want people to improve that transparency by covering how those calculations are made. And also a big one that came up was to review contractor performance, so that stricter oversight with contractors and that accountability for them, because they are the ones that aren't reaching the expectations of the tenants, according to the tenants. So in terms of affordability, we ask that landlords explore the rent formulas that consider tenants' income and prioritise repairs and maintenance, so tenants feel their rent is reflected in the quality of their home. This was just something that we saw yesterday, actually. So, we are aware that landlords are using different methods for tenants to have their say, and this was just an example from Caredig, that there was a QR code where people could actually go and have their say, and we thought it was a good example of best practice. So that's me. That's a very, very brief overview of the report. So we will share a link. One of the team will share a link to the report so everybody can access that. And also just want to say, if you are in one of those specific regions, so North, West Mid, South East Wales or South West Wales, and you would like us to look at this data in more specific to your area and come in and give a presentation to the board or whatever that might be, please do let us know, and we can do that to help it potentially align with what your findings are within your own rent surveys. So I would like to hand over to our first panelist, Ria Stevens from CHC, Community Housing Cymru. I'm just going to share your slides, Ria, because mine weren't working.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I am struck how much there is to say and how rich this report is. So I am going to set myself a little timer to try and hold myself accountable and make sure that I do stick to the 5 minutes. The 5 minutes I've been allowed. I've got 5 minutes. I'm going to try and say 5 things. There's a huge amount that we could go into on this report, but I've chosen some of the highlights for me. And I think one of the first things I'd like to say is that I very much hope that this is just the start of the conversation. The report is really rich. There's a lot in there. So the first thing that I want to say really is thank you. Thank you to all the tenants who completed the survey, the social landlords who promoted it, and particularly to TPAS Cymru, especially Elizabeth, for compiling the report and the findings. It is so important that we have a strong evidence base on rent setting and the views of tenants. It's such a tricky and important balance to strike between affordability for tenants and the investment in the high quality in homes and services that they rely on. And we really do need strong evidence and strong understanding about the views and experiences of tenants. And that is always important, but particularly now when we are facing multiple and layered crises, whether that's the cost of living crisis, which is, we describe it as a crisis, but it's been ongoing for 3 years, the housing crisis, climate change. Individually, these things are having awful consequences for people on the lowest income, but combined, combined, the impact is well, it can be devastating. So it's really, really important that we have this evidence base. So that's the first thing to say. Thank you. There's some things in there, secondly, that I think we should be encouraged by. There is some positive news in the report. There's some improvements on the numbers who have had communication or remember that they've had a communication on rent increase, and satisfaction levels with the quality of communication improving. There's also been improvement in the number of tenants who are aware of financial support available from their landlords. So these are all really positive signs. I don't think nobody is saying that this is job done. This is absolutely about taking what we have learned so far and continuing to build on it. So housing associations have worked really hard in the 5 years of the rent policy to engage and communicate effectively with tenants on rent setting decisions, service charges decisions. And it is really encouraging to see that in some areas, the feedback is improving. We are going in the right direction. So there is more to do, but I'll come to that a little bit later. Thirdly, we know that we've got some persistent challenges, and I could dig into a couple of different places in the report here. Because of time, I'm going to have to focus in just on one or two. And like I said, I really do hope that this is the start of the conversation. But what's really concerning, but perhaps not surprising, is that there is a decrease in the numbers of tenants feeling that their rent and service charges is affordable. I say it's not a surprise. It chimes with our own research at CHC that social housing tenants are amongst those who have been the hardest hit by the cost of living crisis. And as the price of essential goods, whether that be food, fuel, energy prices, whatever, all of that continues to rise, just the ability to make ends meet has been a daily challenge for huge numbers of people. I was concerned to read that 66% of people who work hadn't seen the information on financial support compared to those who are retired. I think we've got a lot more to do there together to make sure that people are aware of what is out there. So last year, housing associations provided access to over £1.3 million in hardship relief, and more than half had increased that for this current financial year. There is help out there for people that need it. The job is making sure that people know. So that was a really important point for me to reflect on. I'm conscious of time. I could so say much more. Fourthly, there are some really big questions remaining for us, and I think I see this report as the start or the continuation of a conversation with tenants, but certainly by no means the end. Really mixed view on the future direction of social rent policy, and that balance that I spoke about at the beginning, so affordability for individual tenants with investing in the high quality homes and services that they need on. We need to strike that balance, and we need to strike that balance in consultation with tenants. So my sense is, okay, we didn't get one clear answer from this exercise. Let's not be deterred. Let's keep asking and let's keep exploring those questions. I think the report is refreshingly honest about some of the lower response rates of younger people and those in work. It's really great to be honest about that, because by acknowledging that gap, we know that we need to do more together to try and reach those people and make sure that those people's views are heard. I guess I'm also struck as well that whilst thinking about the nature of the cost of living crisis and the housing crisis together, I think that together we need to find a way of hearing the views of those people who are not yet, but would like to be social housing tenants, because there's a huge number of people out there who are affected by the housing crisis very immediately. And I think that we need to find a way of reaching them as well and hearing their views. So my final point then, point 5, moving to solutions. I guess it's that, we've got a report, so what are we going to do next? Well, I guess for me, there's two things. And it was so positive, Elizabeth, to see you just share just a quick snapshot there of that one example of interesting or good practice from Caredig. There is lots out there. It's my sense that actually we can continue to work together um, to try and do some practical stuff to gather and share back best practice and ideas for ways to reach people, because this is not a question of will. Housing associations are putting a huge amount of thought and care into this, but if other people have got ideas of what works, let's share it and let's build our learning together. And I think the second point from me, I think there is huge merit in exploring all the report recommendations, but particularly the one for the call about better understanding tenants' income and looking at our affordability assessments. I think there's real merit in exploring that. Housing associations in Wales have widely adopted the JRF living rent model, but they also recognise that within the current rent policy, they don't have complete freedom to take account of individual tenants' rents and affordability. We think that there's more that we can do. We think there's merit in exploring an affordability model for Wales. But that's going to take all of us coming together to explore and unpick and have a really, really robust debate about what that looks like. So 5 minutes, 5 points. Thank you so much for having me. Like I said, really grateful to TPAS Cymru, everybody who took part. I think it's such a valuable report, but really hopeful this is just the start of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ria, for that. We are going to take questions at the end of the guest panelists. So I'll move straight on to Steffan Evans. Thank you so much.
Yeah, diolch, Pnawn da. Thank you very much, everyone, for the welcome to invitation to join you today. And kind of start just by echoing Ria's comments as well about thanking TPAS for the work that you've done on this latest survey as well. Just by way of introduction, for those of you who are not familiar with myself or the Bevan Foundation, so my name's Steffan Evans, and I head up the Bevan Foundation's work on poverty. And what we do as an organisation, we're a charity and we're a think tank, and we work on long-term solutions to poverty and inequality. And housing is obviously one of the key areas that we look at within our work, given that relationship. Housing is nearly everyone's main cost, and that you're not going to be able to solve poverty without coming with a long-term solution to the housing situation that enables everyone to live in a good quality home that they can afford as well. So really welcome TPAS's work, given that background. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the thing that maybe kind of jumped out at me most was kind of some of the findings from the survey around affordability. So the fact that 62% of tenants, were concerned about kind of that affordability stuff. You had, that reduction in the number of people that thought that their rents was affordable. And much like Ria, and I'm sure the other panelists with my comments as well, I don't think we were necessarily surprised by that finding, given the context that we're operating in. As a Bevan Foundation, we've been working with YouGov for a few years now, doing bi-monthly polls, not bi-monthly, biannual polls, where we've been asking people in Wales about how are they managing, firstly with the pandemic and more recently with the cost of living crisis. Our latest survey is actually in the field this week, so we'll hopefully have some new data to share with you later on this year. But from the data that we had from January of this year, we found that 1 in 8 people in Wales sometimes, often, or always struggle to afford all their essentials. And that figure was higher within the social housing sector among social housing tenants, which is perhaps not surprising given that we know that the incomes of people living in social housing are lower, and therefore rising costs meets kind of lower incomes is going to present a bigger squeeze. And of course, we've had recent years as well, kind of issues around welfare policy at Westminster level as well. Things like the benefit cap will be impacting a larger number of tenants as we go on. Two-child limit is something that we've heard a lot of over the summer as a policy that people might want to look at. So all of these things taken together have obviously put pressure on people. But I think it is worth reiterating, though, that rents do matter in this context as well. So that rents are not just kind of something that, well, we can't do anything about it. It's all the other things that what we need to worry about. And I think that's particularly true for those who are in work, and I think that's one of the things that we starting to see emerge from your work here, and something I think definitely needs further exploration, kind of within the housing sector and within Welsh Government more broadly, is how do we balance these tensions, in particular for people whose rents are not fully covered by benefits, so that even with all the issues around the benefit system, increases in social rent might have not really been affecting those whose rents are fully covered by the benefits. Whereas for those who are in work, they will be seeing that eaten into their income at a time when other costs have been going up as well. Um, and there was some work done a few years ago now with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation that showed that above inflation rent rises can lead to tenants being pushed into poverty if their incomes don't increase in line with that as well. So there is a tension there that I think does need further explorations. And with that in mind as well, I think it was a concern that those who are in work or whose primary income comes from work were among those least aware of the extra support that the social landlords were able to offer to them. I think broadly speaking, across kind of looking at our data, people who are out of work are by far the most likely to be going without and struggling. So it does make sense still to be targeting. But in the particular context that we're talking about here in terms of struggling with rent, it is likely to be those who are in work perhaps that is being affected. It might be a unique feature of the social housing sector compared to some other housing tenures as well. I guess it's also worth thinking about this conversation about kind of some of the broader stuff that's going on as well at the moment around housing. We've had new data out on homelessness today that shows, kind of maybe small but no real improvements in what's going on around kind of the numbers of people in homelessness and kind of the need for more action in that space. We've also had a new report out today by Audit Wales that shows that we are behind the target of 20,000 new social housing being constructed. And there's many reasons for that. Kind of the impact of inflation has no doubt also affected the cost of delivery and issues within the planning system. All of these things are always picked up. But I think another factor is that there's a lot of pressure on the social housing sector at the moment in terms of trying to do everything. So we're trying to build more social housing, we're trying to decarb the sector and improve the quality of the housing there. And frankly, the money that's being put in by Welsh Government just isn't enough to cover the cost of that. And I think that this kind of work does, again, kind of help bring a focus to that conversation. And I think it's really welcome to see that there's already work ongoing with CHC, with the Welsh Government, the JRF. We mentioned the living rents model. I know they're looking at some of this again to try and think about how can we deliver everything that we want to deliver at the moment, because the current way of doing it is not going to get us to where we want to be. We can't keep putting the pressure on rents, but also money's tight for kind of public money is currently tight kind of from what we're seeing forecast for. So how can we balance each of these things together to get to a future where kind of where rents are affordable for those who are in social housing, the quality of the homes for people in social housing is improving, but we're also able to kind of get to grips with the homelessness crisis as well. So I think there's plenty of food for thought, and I think this is really useful to inform a lot of the conversations that need to be happening and are already happening over the autumn into the winter as well. So just a few reflections for myself there. And yeah, thanks again for your work on this.
Thank you, Stefan. That was really insightful. And I think, it goes back to what Ria said about us all needing to work together to get through this and knowing what the tenants are saying, and especially that element of transparency. Like, there is all this going on. We're all aware of that. But, our tenants are aware of that. So I'll hand you now over to Robin White from Shelter Cymru. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And at risk of being repetitive, I also wanted to start by just thanking TPAS and all of the tenants who participated as well. I think there's a huge amount in this report that's valuable. And good policy making needs diverse voices. It needs lived experience. So reports like this are so valuable. And you can see it in both the bits that are being rejected. It helps us focus minds on where we need to be putting more effort. And I just think it's a hugely valuable resource, and I appreciate the work that goes into it. Before I get into sort of some reflections on the report itself, I thought it'd be useful to say sort of the context of where Shelter Cymru's views on some of this comes from, what drives them. So as I'm sure most people on this call will know, we are an advice provider as well as a campaigning charity. We're offering advice across the whole of Wales. We do online, we do in person. And we offer advice to a whole range of people and across all tenures. So we work with people who are social tenants, we work with private tenants, homeowners, those who are homeless, those at risk of homelessness. And I think that's important because it means we try to look at things we try not to look at each housing issue in isolation because of that, and try to think about where the connections are between different issues. Rents is a hugely important policy. We need to get the balance right when it comes to rent setting, but we also try really hard to think about the aspects that go, say, beyond affordability. You know, what does rent setting policy mean for the support services social landlords are able to provide? What does it mean for the amount of grant we need from central government and from Welsh government to be able to do things? And because we're working not only with social tenants, but people that really need social homes, that's why we think that's so important, because we're seeing people at different points in the system every single day, and we're seeing the constant failures all across it and how we need to balance things. I suppose, though, again, at risk of being repetitive, though, the biggest thing that jumped out at me from the report, because it chimes with what we're seeing in our services data, is the affordability point. We know that people are really struggling right now and have been for a number of years. And a lot of the clients that we work with, they are suffering from rent levels in social rented sector and the private rented sector. They are suffering the cost of living crisis, and they're suffering because of energy. And so, again, we weren't surprised to see that more and more tenants are concerned about the affordability of their rents. And also, we really weren't surprised, because we are doing a piece of work at the moment on rent arrears and the need to think about how we approach rent arrears and view rent arrears as not an issue that we need to address. Someone's in arrears, how do we just address this issue? But rather, it's a signal that people are struggling. And I think that's important, because it goes to the heart of what I'd say about that affordability point as well. You know, where people are saying the affordability of their rents is becoming an issue, we'd see it as a signal of perhaps a wider problem as well. And when we are trying to address this and get that number coming the other way, that people feel their rent is affordable, we also need to be looking at all the other costs that they are facing, because that rent affordability probably doesn't sit in isolation. There's probably a lot we need to do to put pressure on Welsh government to provide the right support grants for people, and on central government at Westminster to be looking at the benefit system to ensure it's fit for purpose, so people can access homes, so they can sustain tenancies. And things like this data are useful in those contexts as well, I think, as well as being useful for us to be able to go to social landlords. And we know social landlords are doing a lot to try and support tenants, but I think we're always also going to say there's probably a bit more. So there's still a bit there for social landlords perhaps to do to support tenants, but we think it also points to a lot of other bits that need to be done to support people during the current cost of living crisis. The other sort of big bit I wanted to pick out is the transparency point again. We support strongly the recommendations being made around transparency. I don't think we could ever go far enough in being transparent with tenants about how rents are set, about what their rent is being spent on, about the differences between rent and service charges. It's easy to see in this work that tenants feel that they need more of that, and where tenants want more of that, we should be responding to it. I also think it would perhaps, again, help with some of those points on the perception of, is your rent fair? Obviously, more transparency will not do anything to help people who are struggling because there simply isn't enough money. It cannot address that. What it might help us do is increase the understanding of the sheer range of the work that social landlords are doing to try and support tenants, which many tenants may not be aware of, even if they can benefit from it. And like Stefan, I think that point about people in work not knowing is troubling and is a good place to start. But across the board, we should be looking at how we improve transparency. This is a big report. Maria said it. I could talk for hours about things like the way to vary rents and different approaches to rent setting, but I am sure that the Q&A will pick some of that up and will be much more interesting. So I'll leave it there, because I think, yeah, affordability for us will be the key one that we need to do things over the coming months and years to address.
Thank you so much for that, Robin. I'm now going to hand over to Alicia from Type Help.
Hi. Hello.
Alicia,
Sorry.
don't know how
Yes.
happened then.
Still happens, doesn't it? Thank you very much for having me here. I'm in a very lucky position to be last, so everyone already said whatever I wanted to say. I totally agree with everything you said. And starting with thank you for big thank you for this report. I think especially the aspects where you've disaggregated the data and you're looking at the experiences of different groups, that they are, massively interesting to us as an equality organization. So I'm just going to cover these a couple of points around that. And the first being communication. Obviously, very good to see, and I'm sure it's quite pleasing to see a little bit of improvement around communication. And as Ria mentioned, it's a journey that's clearly is being taken seriously. So there's some good lessons to be learned, and yet, there's still big kind of groups of tenants that are not happy with the communication or transparency around rent or service charges. One particular group where the results were interesting is ethnic minority tenants. So there's a stat there that is quite a big, it shows quite a big difference with about 1/3 of ethnic minority tenants being dissatisfied with the communications that they have received on rent increases compared to only 17% of all tenants. That is nearly twice as likely. And that there could be very many reasons for that. It's easy to make assumptions. People might assume it's perhaps language issues, but there could be many other reasons for that. So I think just this difference kind of really makes the case for looking at that data and looking at the satisfaction amongst your own tenants and disaggregating that by different groups um, in your own organizations as well as targeting really communication and continuous, as well as looking at data, continuous engagement with specific groups. This is a big difference. Why is this happening? And the kind of the other groups that you've touched on already really is the sort of the differences between the experiences of disabled, older and working age people. And there's many kind of different facets to that in the report. Really, really um, interesting and worrying in some places as well. Older and disabled people felt less supported, particularly in accessing appropriate housing and financial assistance. Then the working age people stats have already been quoted. It's a really interesting difference. Is it an issue around targeting? And then disabled tenants being particularly concerned about rent and service charge increases. I mean, I'm not surprised there. I was just looking in preparing for this. I was looking at the latest report from Scope. Now and again, they run a disability price tag report, which looks at how much more does it cost to be disabled in the UK. And just to show you some of the differences there, disabled households with at least one disabled child or adult face extra cost of £975 a month on average. Households with two disabled adults, £1,200 a month. And disability-related extra costs are equivalent to 63% of disabled households' income after housing costs. And all of these amounts are taken after taking PIP payments into account, which obviously are supposed to cover these costs, but they don't. What are these costs? Disability-related products and services that people need, therapies, medicines, equipment, and so on. Everyday things like, booking holiday might be more expensive because you need accessibility, relying more on shopping delivery, more expensive, ready meals that you need because perhaps you can't prepare them. Higher usage of essentials like heating, transport, taxis, and so on. So definitely support the call in the report for much more kind of targeted comms and support really, and analysis really of stats. And I was thinking about kind of perhaps examples of this. We do quite a lot around, using data and then, analyzing data, disaggregating that by various diversity strands, and then engaging with people to see why the differences exist. And we have quite, a few examples of organizations doing that to their satisfaction surveys, but also, other data. Recently, an RSL told us about looking at their data around rent arrears and identifying that for them, it was younger people who were much more likely to be in rent arrears, and they were able to target and adjust that support. So that's kind of really, really interesting, slightly worrying, to us. I think there's a lot of good practice really to learn from, so we should continue doing that. And last but not least, around transparency and accountability, totally support the calls in the report, and welcome really what the tenants are and TPAS are saying. I think that the call for more transparency can only be good for us, right? Can be good for landlords because it improves the organizations and the services that we provide. We should embrace this. But in addition to transparency, I think we should really seriously think about accountability as well. We might be well aware of, how my service charges are calculated, but what are the opportunities to influence those decisions? And if there are any kind of lessons around that, the most extreme version of that we were able to start reading on yesterday, and I know that you've got another event on Grenfell, but yeah, that's my contribution.
Thank you.
And yeah, looking forward to questions, really.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate there's so much to digest for everybody on the call, and obviously people want to actually see the report and read the report. But if you do have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. I think for me, writing this report, you can't really emphasize how much data comes out of it and how much you want to show everybody, what the tenants are saying, just to value the fact that tenants have taken their time to fill out this survey, and they do so every single year about their rents. And I feel like it's so important that we take this information and we use it and we put it to good use, and that we look at the recommendations and we use them internally across social landlords, and it kind of starts the conversation and what else we can potentially do, looking at these recommendations, looking at the findings within the report to enable some changes. So yeah, that's it for me. I want to thank all the tenants, so much, especially our Tenant Pulse Advisory Group, for their constant support throughout this, and to all of our panelists for being here today to give comment. I think David Wilton, our chief exec, is going to come on the call just to give a comment before we hopefully have some questions off the attendees. Well, he's trying to come on the call. I don't know if it's working very well.
Yeah, I am coming. I don't know if I'm visible yet. Am I visible? No.
Yeah, we can see you.
So this isn't my report, this is the work Elizabeth's done. I wanted to mention one section because I asked for some questions to go in around rent variations, because people like Ria and myself, there's a Welsh Government task force looking at rent formulas going forward. And we've had years of just tracking on inflation. So rents went up linked to inflation. And is there any other models? So I was one who asked for those questions around, if you were in a more energy efficiency home, so you got cheaper bills, should people pay a bit more rent? Or in different locations. If some of you remember Trevalis, they used to pitch a dilemma they had, which was 2-bedroom property, one in Mardy, one in Pontyclun, and then one in Pontyclun had roads, trail access to them for shops, things like that. And they posed the question, should the rent be varied, depending on location? So we tested all these this time, and the tenants very much rejected pretty much all of those things. And for me, I'm a bit gutted, truthfully, because I think we need to do I'd look at how we vary the rents. I do think there was probably, because I suggested the question, so I have to take responsibility for them. I think we worded it in such a way where we said, should you pay more? And we didn't probably emphasize that those in the really inefficient homes and would pay a lot less. And I don't think maybe looking at the data afterwards, whilst I accept the results, and maybe the wording could have been a bit better, but certainly I took a lot of insight into that, and I think that will go into some of our work in the future. Yeah.
And I think, can I just add to that in terms of, I think a lot of it again is about the understanding and the current cost of living crisis that we're in. So, any idea of paying more rents or paying more for anything is not going to be desirable to anybody, let alone people who are already struggling. So I think it's more about that conversation and the transparency, as we said, with tenants, in collaboration with tenants.
Yeah. And that's what we've got to take forward. And certainly those insights, by the way, will feed into I'm going to make it get into Welsh Government's working group on the rent reform programme, and I know that your insight will go into there over the next couple of months. So yeah.
Okay, so there's no questions from our attendees. Everybody, I'm assuming, just wants to go away and have a read and digest it all, because there's a lot of information in there to digest. I would again like to thank our panelists for coming today, and to all of our team who have supported, this, who are always in the background doing so much. And just really a plea to use this report. As Ria said, we've got a report now, so what? So it's what we do with it now. So if you do want us to break the data down into your own region, please do get in touch, and we'll do what we can to support you with, your own rent setting. So
Elizabeth, could I just pop up a poll to ask some people?
Oh yeah, of course.
So this is a different formula. We've reflected on previous ones. Normally we come on, whether it's me, Elizabeth, Akshita, the Net Zero ones, and we, for 40 minutes, just give you stats after stats. And this was Elizabeth's idea this time, was to ask some panelists to come on and comment, and a different approach to it, not to overload you. I'm curious, this could end up embarrassing if it embarrasses the panelists, but I'm curious to know, was this a better approach or not? So I'm going to put a poll up if that's okay. It's a bit rough, so bear with me if there's any spelling mistakes in it, Mel Rayner in particular. But
as long as you don't ask which one was the best.
I'm just asking,
I'm all right.
does it show yet? Can you vote yet?
Yeah,
Do you prefer this approach, or do you want to go back to the previous one where TPAS just goes through all the data and graphs and things like that?
And just while we're doing that, actually, we have had a request off social landlords that we duplicate the survey that we put out to tenants for the landlords, so that we can draw comparisons, or we can kind of finish the circle. So this is what tenants are saying, this is what landlords are saying, and what's missing. So we are currently looking into doing that. So if you have an interest in that, please do let me know.
Okay. I'm going to, another 10 seconds, people are a bit slow answering, but I'll give it a little bit more. There's still some of you probably not listening or not on screen.
Not listening.
No, I don't mean listen. Sorry, that's
not listening, David. What's it saying? I can't see.
Right, I'll end the poll now. If you've had a
we
chance
prefer
to.
this approach. This good.
So I don't know if you can see on screen.
That's previous approach.
So they prefer this approach is quite clearly.
Yeah.
I don't know what you can see on screen. I can't necessarily see what you're seeing, but I think there's a good endorsement.
So I think what we're saying is they like you lot. They like you panelists over me and David. So we'll definitely be getting you back.
And we won't be able to do that every time, but like in January, Elizabeth did on homelessness, and maybe people like, come on, we could invite on and to talk about if it was a particular theme, or if it was a net zero one, possibly get some people more involved in net zero. So thanks for that. That's something for us to bear, and this was Elizabeth's idea, so respect to her for that, and we'll take it forward.
Okay, thank you all so much, and we'll be in touch. Take care.
Thank you.